and this is 3 questions solved. On this channel, we work through several questions, 3 in fact, and they're science-related questions. Today's topic is inheritance. Here are some examples of crosses. The first one we'll do is autosomal dominant inheritance. And in this case, one dominant allele will confer the trait. Examples of autosomal dominant traits include brown eyes, the widow's peak, cleft chin, cheek dimple, that's the one we'll do, and osteogenesis imperfecta. When we look at the crosses, D, the capital D, will be the dominant allele, and the little d represents the recessive allele. The capital D would be for cheek dimple, the little d without cheek dimple. And as I mentioned at the beginning, only one allele is needed in order to transfer the dimple in the cheek. Let's talk a little bit about autosomes. We have 22 pairs of autosomes and 1 set of sex chromosomes. So this is going to be an autosomal dominant trait, not a sex-linked trait. The way that we set up the cross, we're doing homozygous dominant with heterozygous. In this case, it shows 2 capital Ds, and if you think of the term homozygous, homo meaning same, and then zygous meaning to join or unite. So we have 2 alleles, and alleles are just copies of a gene. Some copies will be dominant, some will be recessive. We get one allele from our mom, the other from our dad. The first set of alleles usually represents the mother's contribution. And then the second set would represent the father's contribution. We call these genotypes. When we set up this cross, usually the mother's alleles can go horizontally at the top, and then the father's on the side. The way that we actually do the cross, we're going to use a Punnett square. At the upper right, this will get 1 capital D from the mother, and then 1 capital D from the father. So the genotype of this offspring would be capital D, which is homozygous dominant. At the upper right, we have a capital D from the mother and another capital D from the father. So this individual also is homozygous dominant. How about at the bottom left? We get a capital D from the mother and a lowercase d from the father. At the bottom right, a capital D from the mother and a lowercase d from the father. So these individuals are heterozygous. Hetero means different, and again, zygous meaning to join together. Let's answer the questions. The first one wants to know the mother's genotype. And that will be at the top here, capital D, capital D. And the father's genotype on the side, capital D, little d. The genotypes present in the offspring. So we have two that are big D, and two that are big D, little d. So we have the big D, homozygous dominant, and the big D, little d, heterozygous. Next, the genotypic ratio. And the way that this is drawn, we'll do the homozygous dominant, then the heterozygous, then the homozygous recessive. We have two that are homozygous dominant. We have two heterozygous, and we don't have any homozygous recessive. So the genotypic ratio is 2 to 2 to 0. The offspring's phenotype, and this goes back to what we covered earlier. There is only one capital D needed in order for the individual to have dimples. And all of the offspring, if we take a look at our Punnett square again, each of them have at least one capital D. So all of these offspring will have dimples. Okay. The phenotypic ratio of the offspring. So we have 4 with dimples, and then none of them that don't have dimples. So 4 to 0. What percentage of the offspring have dimples? So 4 out of 4, that would be 100%. Okay, I hope that this makes sense, and we'll move on to our next one. Make sure you have your scratch paper. This will really help. So question number 2. This one is over albinism. Let's start off talking a little bit about some recessive traits. This includes the straight hairline, cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, and our example today, albinism. So with recessive traits, you need 2 recessive alleles in order to have the trait. That means individuals who are little a will have albinism. Albinism is a loss of melanin. Capital A represents the dominant allele, which is without albinism. The lowercase a is recessive, and that would be the one that has the albinism mutation. We're doing a cross over capital A, little a, times capital A, little a. So heterozygous versus heterozygous. Let's go ahead and fill in our Punnett square. At the upper right, we get the uppercase A from the father and the recessive one from the mother. At the bottom left, we have the dominant A from the mother, and then the recessive A from the father. And the last square at the bottom right, lowercase a or recessive from the father, and then lowercase a again, the recessive allele from the mother. Now let's answer our questions. What is the mother's genotype? And it's just horizontal here. Capital A for dominant, little a for recessive. So heterozygous. The father's genotype is the same. So we have a capital A and a recessive A. Genotypes of the offspring. There's several of them. So we have capital A, which is homozygous dominant. We have heterozygous here and here. And we have homozygous recessive. Now, let's do the genotypic ratio. So the homozygous dominant, that was the one at the upper left, and there was just one. There are two heterozygous and one homozygous recessive. Phenotypes of the offspring. If we look at our Punnett square again, we can see that three of them have at least one dominant allele. And because of that one dominant allele, these individuals would be considered normal. Only one individual would have albinism. So the phenotype would be 3 without albinism, and then 1 with albinism. So the phenotypic ratio of the offspring is 3 without albinism, 1 with albinism. What percentage of the offspring have albinism? That would be 1 out of 4 total, which is 25%. How did you do on that question? Let's try this last example. And here we're going to identify the missing genotype. In this case, we're looking at brown or blue eye color. And earlier, I gave you some information that will help with this. So brown eyes, that's a dominant trait, okay? So knowing that brown eyes is a dominant trait, we have our key here. Capital B is the dominant allele for brown eyes, little b, the recessive allele for blue eyes. Now we're going to fill in the missing parental genotype. We know that the father's genotype is heterozygous, which is one dominant and then one recessive. For this one, I'll add in the genotypes of the children, and that will allow us to find what the genotype of the missing parent will be. Okay, these are the offspring. At the upper left, we know that a dominant allele is given. And there's also a recessive allele. So that must come from the missing parent. As we wrap up our session, let me know in the chat below what other topics you'd like for me to review. And also, check out my website. At the upper right, the same thing. The dominant comes from the father, and then the mother must donate the recessive allele. As we look at the last two genotypes of the offspring, the father donates the recessive. The mother also donates a recessive. And that's the same for the bottom right. So the missing genotype would be from the mother. It's little b, little b. The father's genotype is on this side, and we have big B, little b. So genotypes present in the offspring, big B, little b, and then little b, little b. The genotypic ratio, we have 0 homozygous dominant, 2 heterozygous, and 2 homozygous recessive. The offspring's phenotype. So if we look at our Punnett square again, the heterozygous ones will have brown eyes. And then the homozygous recessive ones will have blue eyes. Let's do our phenotypic ratio. We have 2 with brown eyes, and then 2 with blue eyes. What percentage of the offspring have blue eyes? We're going with the recessive trait for this question. So there were 2 individuals with blue eyes, and there's a total of 4 offspring. So 2 out of 4 is 50%. So these are 3 questions solved. I hope you enjoyed today's video and that you learned something new. I look forward to meeting with you during a one-on-one session. I also offer group sessions. Let's come and get closer to your goals.